The Templar Revelation, the secret ritual that rewrote medieval power. In the dim frontier, where medieval power was shaped through silence, blood, and forbidden knowledge, a truth long buried beneath centuries of fear begins to vibrate like a pulse returning from the dead. Imagine a chamber carved beneath ancient stone, hidden so deeply within Templar fortresses that even kings who funded their battles never knew it existed. Torches flicker against walls engraved with symbols that predate Christendom, while manuscripts sealed in iron boxes whisper of a ritual so powerful, so destabilizing, that the church itself fought to destroy every trace of it. As you step into this shadowed vault, the air thickens, carrying the scent of old wax, damp earth, and a knowledge that refuses to die. What you are about to uncover is not legend, not rumor, but a revelation preserved only among the highest Templar ranks, a revelation capable of rewriting the very architecture of medieval power. The world was never meant to learn that the Templars unearthed teachings hidden for millennia, rituals that connected spiritual authority not to institutions, but to individuals who possessed the strength to wield it. These rites, practiced in absolute secrecy, granted the order a unity, discipline, and clarity that made them seemingly invincible. To the Vatican, this was not devotion, it was disruption. And yet the deeper you walk into this story, the more impossible it becomes to dismiss the shadows. Every corridor of this history vibrates with the weight of what the Church feared most, a spirituality independent of Rome. Strengthened by knowledge, the Templars guarded with their lives. The ritual at the center of this revelation was never meant to surface. Conducted in candlelit chambers beneath the Temple Mount, it was said to bind warriors not through fear of punishment, but through a code older than the Crusades themselves. Knights who underwent it emerged, transformed, no longer servants of kings or clergy, but guardians of a purpose greater than any earthly power. And this transformation terrified the Church. Their authority depended on submission. The Templars' power was born from awakening. Each initiate became a force impossible to manipulate, a soul anchored in conviction rather than obedience. And the Vatican knew, a single knight carrying this revelation was dangerous. Thousands of them were catastrophic. Whispers of the ritual began to spread across courts and kingdoms. Some called it heresy, others called it enlightenment, but all agreed on one thing: it made the Templars untouchable. Kings negotiated in fear. Monarchs sought alliances through flattery. Enemies hesitated before raising a blade. The Church, watching its influence slip like sand through its fingers, began weaving the web that would one day strangle the order in accusations and fire. Their fear was not of swords but of knowledge. The ritual gave the Templars something no decree could revoke: inner power, and inner power cannot be burned. Now imagine the moment when Rome realized this truth could no longer be controlled. The Templars had become more than warriors. They had become symbols of a force that the Church could never replicate, a force born from understanding rather than submission. In desperation, the Vatican launched a purge disguised as justice, hoping to destroy not just the men, but the revelation they carried. But secrets protected by conviction do not die with their guardians. Fragments survived, symbols carved into stone, coded documents smuggled across borders, testimonies whispered on deathbeds. As this hulk reaches its final breath, the vault around you seems to close in, revealing the truth Rome feared above all. The Templars discovered a ritual capable of shifting the balance of power away from the Church and toward those who dared to seek truth beyond doctrine. And that is why this revelation was buried, not because it was false, but because it was dangerously true. In the hushed twilight of medieval memory, where truth was carved into stone and then buried beneath centuries of fear, the first traces of a forbidden revelation begin to rise from the darkness like embers resisting extinction. Imagine walking through an abandoned fortress where the air feels heavier with every step, as if each corridor carries the weight of secrets no chronicle ever dared to record. The Knights Templar, long portrayed as disciplined warriors of faith, emerge here not as obedient servants of kings and clergy, but as guardians of a ritual that challenged the very foundation of spiritual authority in the Middle Ages. This introduction pulls you into a world where power was shaped not by crowns or decrees, but by knowledge hidden beneath the Temple Mount, protected by men bound through silence, loyalty, and a code older than any cathedral built above it. As you step deeper into this forbidden narrative, the shadows begin to whisper a truth the Church worked tirelessly to erase. The Templars did not simply fight battles. They uncovered ideas, symbols, and teachings capable of shifting the balance of power away from institutions and toward individuals, awakened by understanding rather than fear. Their rise was fueled by something the Vatican could not control, a revelation that placed spiritual strength inside the knight himself, rather than in the hands of those who ruled from gilded halls. This was the spark that terrified Rome, for a warrior who carries inner authority cannot be manipulated, silenced, or reshaped by doctrine. The more you explore the echoes of this hidden ritual, the more the medieval world around you changes shape. Walls once seen as monuments of holiness now reveal themselves as barriers meant to protect power, not truth. The Templars, drawn into a pact with the Church they once trusted, began to see beyond the veils of political sanctity, glimpsing realities that only deepened the dangers surrounding them. And with every discovery they made, the Church's anxiety hardened into resentment. For Rome understood that a single knight illuminated by forbidden knowledge was a threat, but an entire order awakened by it was a force capable of rewriting history. This introduction leads you to the edge of a revelation the Vatican hoped would never surface. A truth sealed with iron, protected by shadows, and whispered only among those prepared to risk everything for clarity. You are about to enter the world. The Templars truly inhabited a world of hidden chambers, secret rites, and a knowledge so transformative that it threatened thrones, doctrines, and centuries of religious control. And as the final breath of this introduction settles, one realization becomes unavoidable. The ritual they uncovered did not simply reshape the order, it reshaped the medieval world, and its echo still vibrates beneath the history we were taught to believe. In the first layer of this forbidden development, the heart of the Templar Revelation emerges from beneath the very stones of the Temple Mount, where the order conducted excavations far deeper and far more deliberate than history books admit. While the world believed the knights were stationed there to protect pilgrims, their highest-ranking members pursued something entirely different: manuscripts, relics, symbols, and coded inscriptions that predated Christian doctrine by centuries. These discoveries contained ideas that challenged the Church's tightly controlled narrative of spiritual authority. Texts describing ancient rites of initiation, teachings that connected divine strength to personal awakening rather than institutional hierarchy, and fragments of lost traditions, suggesting that true power came not from Rome but from an inner transformation available to any seeker prepared to endure the ritual. The Templars didn't guard this knowledge. They studied it, practiced it, and integrated it into their structure, creating a warrior monk unlike anything Europe had ever seen, one bound not by fear but by enlightenment. The more the Templars absorbed this ancient knowledge, the more visible the transformation became in their discipline, unity, and fearlessness. Knights who underwent the ritual emerged with an unshakable clarity that terrified both enemies and allies. They moved with purpose, fought with precision, and obeyed not out of obligation, but out of conviction. This internal awakening produced a psychological strength that no papal decree could replicate. Rome sensed this shift almost immediately. Reports surfaced describing Templar ceremonies held in underground chambers lit by circles of flame, where initiates vowed loyalty not to the Church, but to the truth the ritual revealed. For the Vatican, this was intolerable. A warrior empowered from within could not be controlled, manipulated, or redirected through fear of punishment. The ritual had granted the Templars a spiritual independence that placed them beyond Rome's reach, creating a silent divide inside an alliance that had once seemed unbreakable. In the second layer of this hidden revelation, the true power of the Templar ritual becomes undeniable as its effects ripple through the order's internal structure. Knights who underwent the ceremony were transformed into something far more formidable than elite soldiers. They became men anchored in a clarity of purpose that no crown or clerical authority could shake. Their fearlessness in battle, long attributed to discipline alone, was now understood to come from a deeper awakening. These knights no longer fought for glory, wealth, or earthly favor. They fought with a conviction born from the belief that their strength came from a source older and higher than any institution. This inner certainty made them nearly impossible to break. While other armies scattered under pressure, the Templars held their lines with a calm that bordered on supernatural. Because each knight believed the ritual had aligned him with the truth the world was not ready to accept. For the Church, this was the beginning of a spiritual insubordination far more threatening than any political rebellion. As the ritual spread quietly through the ranks, its influence reached beyond the battlefield and into the very fabric of Templar leadership. Commanders noticed that initiated knights required fewer orders, acted with sharper instincts, and demonstrated a unity that felt almost instinctual. They were not bound by hierarchy in the traditional medieval sense. They were bound by purpose. This shift created an internal cohesion unmatched by any military force in Europe, allowing the order to navigate the chaos of crusades, political betrayals, and shifting alliances with a precision Rome could neither predict nor replicate. Their silence, once a symbol of discipline, evolved into a shield that protected their knowledge. Outsiders could not penetrate their ranks because Templars no longer served out of obedience alone. They served out of awakened conviction, and this made them loyal not to the Church's authority, but to the truth they believed they had uncovered. Whispers of this ritual began reaching royal courts and ecclesiastical chambers, stirring unease among those who depended on predictable loyalty. Kings feared soldiers who answered to something higher than earthly power. Bishops feared warriors who bowed to no clerical hierarchy. Even allies grew suspicious, sensing a spiritual autonomy within the Templars that threatened the established order. Rumors spread of secret ceremonies, coded chants, and nights where entire companies of knights emerged from underground chambers with a hardened resolve. Rome, already nervous about the order's growing wealth and influence, now faced a force spiritually independent and ideologically immune to manipulation. The Templars were no longer just a military order. they had become a parallel spiritual movement, one that answered to its own revelations rather than the Church's decrees. As the Church attempted to tighten its grip, it discovered a horrifying truth. The Templars' power did not come from Rome, and therefore could not be revoked by Rome. Their authority was self-sustaining, strengthened by a ritual that awakened each knight from within, creating a foundation the Church could not dismantle. The Vatican, as fear shifted into desperation, as it realized the order no longer required ecclesiastical approval to justify its actions. The Templars had crossed an invisible threshold. They had become a spiritual force outside the Church's dominion, and in a world where authority was built on the illusion of exclusive access to the divine, this was unforgivable. The ritual had not just empowered the Templars, it had created the very reason for their destruction. In the third layer of this forbidden revelation, the ritual's influence begins to spread beyond the physical and spiritual. Transformation of the Templar Knights and into the very political landscape of medieval Europe. As more members of the order underwent the secret initiation, a new kind of leadership emerged. One not shaped by lineage, wealth, or clerical approval, but by inner awakening. These awakened knights carried themselves with an authority that unsettled monarchs and church officials alike. They questioned orders that contradicted the greater truth they believed they had uncovered, and they refused to participate in campaigns driven purely by greed or papal ambition. This ideological independence was unheard of in a world where obedience was the currency of power. The Templars, once considered the Church's most reliable instrument, were now an unpredictable force, with a compass that refused to align with Rome's interests. And as their clarity grew, so did the Vatican's fear. For a knight who thinks for himself is far more dangerous than one who merely wields a sword. The implications of the ritual became undeniable when Templar commanders began making decisions that subtly deviated from papal strategy. They secured alliances with local leaders Rome sought to suppress, protected populations the Church deemed expendable, and refused to carry out missions that contradicted their internal code. Kings noticed their independence. Nobles whispered about their incorruptibility, and peasants, witnessing their protection and fairness, began trusting the Templars more than they trusted clergy. The Church, accustomed to being the sole voice of moral authority, now faced a rival whose actions carried more credibility than its sermons. This shift was catastrophic. Influence in the medieval world was not maintained through force alone, but through perception, and the perception was changing. The Templars were becoming symbols of justice, purity, and strength, while the Church appeared increasingly political, manipulative, and desperate to maintain control. As the ritual continued to shape the order, rumors began spreading of Templars possessing knowledge that challenged the Church's teachings at their core. Whispers claimed they had uncovered writings suggesting a far more personal path to the divine, one that bypassed clerical mediation entirely. Others spoke of practices that encouraged direct spiritual enlightenment, without sacraments, indulgences, or ecclesiastical authority. Whether these stories were exaggerated or true did not matter. Their existence alone was enough to threaten Rome's monopoly over salvation. The Church could not tolerate a world where knights believed spiritual awakening could be achieved without its blessing. This was not merely dissent. It was a revolution of the soul, and revolutions built on belief are nearly impossible to extinguish. The Church understood that if the Templars continued down this path, the entire foundation of medieval religious structure could collapse. A warrior monk, illuminated from within, posed a greater existential threat than any army. Such a knight carried not just strength, but conviction, and conviction is a force no throne and no altar can suppress. With every passing year, Rome felt its influence slipping as the Templars' awakened presence expanded across Europe and the Holy Land. Their loyalty was no longer for sale, their obedience no longer guaranteed, and their moral authority no longer inferior to the Church's claims. The Vatican faced a terrifying realization. The Templars were no longer its creation. They had become something entirely new and entirely beyond Rome's control. In the fourth layer of this hidden transformation, the Templars' awakened identity begins to reshape their diplomacy, creating a geopolitical ripple that the Church could neither anticipate nor contain. While Rome operated through rigid dogma and political intimidation, the Templars navigated the medieval world with a clarity born from their secret ritual, a clarity that allowed them to see value not in domination, but in understanding. They forged unexpected alliances with local leaders, merchants, and even former enemies, treating diplomacy as a battlefield where wisdom often achieved what swords could not. Their ability to negotiate with Muslim commanders, protect civilian populations, and honor treaties that Rome intended to break made them respected across territories that once bled under Crusader banners. This respect became influence, and influence became power, the kind of power not granted by papal decree but earned through honor. The Vatican, watching from afar, realized it was losing control not just of the order's actions, but of the world's perception of them. In the medieval mind, perception was everything, and the perception was shifting decisively in the Templars' favor. This diplomatic independence threatened the Church's authority. more deeply than any battlefield victory or financial triumph. Rome's dominance relied on being the sole arbiter of morality, the only institution capable of deciding who was righteous and who was condemned. But when kings, nobles, and entire cities began trusting Templar judgment over that of bishops, the illusion began to crack. The Templars mediated disputes with fairness the Church could not replicate. They protected territories Rome would have exploited. Their presence brought stability where papal influence brought chaos. People began to see them not as instruments of the Church, but as guardians of a higher truth, a truth shaped by the ritual that had awakened them from within. This shift undermined the Vatican's monopoly on spiritual credibility, and every time a Templar treaty succeeded where a papal one failed, Rome's fear deepened. The ritual had not only created enlightened warriors, it had created enlightened diplomats capable of reshaping global dynamics. As their diplomatic reach extended, rumors spread through royal courts that the Templars possessed knowledge of ancient systems of governance, justice, and spiritual leadership uncovered beneath the Temple Mount. Some whispered that they followed a code older than any written by the Church. Others claimed they protected relics that proved the existence of a truth independent of Rome. Whether these stories were exaggerated or fragments of reality, their impact was undeniable. Monarchs who once bowed to the Vatican now sought Templar counsel in private. Merchants relied on the order to safeguard trade routes the Church could not protect. Scholars gravitated toward their libraries, where knowledge was preserved rather than censored. This intellectual and diplomatic authority positioned the Templars as a parallel power structure, one built not on dogma, but on clarity, discipline, and a ritual that gave them a vision sharper than any papal proclamation. The Vatican soon recognized that it was no longer facing a military order or even a wealthy institution. It was facing a movement of awakened knights whose spiritual independence, diplomatic influence, and unwavering unity placed them beyond the Church's reach. Rome could not excommunicate them without risking rebellion from kings. It could not undermine them without exposing its own corruption. It could not control them without destroying the very pact it once relied upon. The Templars had become a force that operated freely across borders, cultures, and ideologies, guided by a truth the Church feared and refused to acknowledge. And as their influence continued to grow, the Vatican understood with chilling clarity that it had created not allies but rivals destined to outshine every institution that sought to rule through fear rather than enlightenment. In the fifth and final layer of this revelation, the true reason behind the Church's fear at last comes into focus, not through documents, diplomacy, or even the Templars' unmatched discipline, but through the rise of something Rome could never control: myth. As the order grew in power, wealth, and spiritual independence, stories began to spread across continents about what the Templars had truly discovered beneath the Temple Mount. Whispers of ancient rites, relics that challenged doctrine, and knowledge capable of empowering any individual beyond the reach of clerical authority ignited the medieval imagination. Whether these legends were accurate mattered little. What mattered was their impact. The Templars were no longer merely warriors. They had become symbols, embodiments of a truth older than Rome, guardians of enlightenment that no decree could suppress. In a world where story equaled power, the Vatican faced an enemy it could not burn, silence, or rewrite. Myth made the Templars immortal, and that immortality threatened the Church's dominion over the minds of the faithful. As their legend grew, so did the perception that the Templars held answers to mysteries the Church refused to acknowledge. Some believed they guarded writings that redefined the nature of divine authority. Others whispered of teachings suggesting a direct path to the sacred without the need for priests or sacraments. Every rumor eroded the Vatican's influence. People began turning to the symbolism of the Templars' purity, discipline, courage, spiritual clarity, instead of the authority of the clergy, whose corruption had become impossible to ignore. Rome realized it was losing not only political power, but spiritual loyalty. And once a population begins to believe that truth exists outside the Church, the institution's foundation begins to crack. The ritual the Templars practiced had awakened a force far greater than military might. It had awakened the possibility of spiritual independence, and that possibility was spreading faster than the Church could contain. In desperation, the Vatican declared war, not on the order's actions, but on its meaning. Accusations of heresy, blasphemy, and forbidden practices were fabricated to poison the Templars' reputation in the eyes of the public. Kings were coerced, nobles intimidated, and inquisitors unleashed to dismantle the order piece by piece. But even as Templars were imprisoned, tortured, and executed, their silence remained unbroken, a silence that only fueled the myth further. The Church learned too late that killing a man does not kill what he represents. The ritual survived in coded manuscripts, encrypted symbols, hidden archives, and the memories of those who had undergone its awakening. For every knight the Church destroyed, 1,000 stories rose in his place, and stories are more dangerous than armies. By the time the Templars were officially dissolved, the Vatican faced a truth it refused to admit. The order's physical destruction had done nothing to extinguish its spiritual legacy. In trying to erase the ritual, Rome had amplified it. In trying to obliterate the myth, it had immortalized it. And in trying to reclaim its authority, it had exposed its deepest fear, that true power does not come from institutions, but from knowledge, conviction, and inner awakening. The Templars had discovered a revelation capable of rewriting the medieval world, and even in death, that revelation survived. The Church could destroy the bodies, but not the truth. It could silence the men, but not the meaning. It could end the order, but not the force it unleashed. The Templar ritual had become irreversible, a spark carried through time, whispering that the greatest threat to tyranny is always enlightenment. As the final echoes of this forbidden journey fade into the dark corridors of history, one truth emerges with the weight of stone and the clarity of fire. The Knights Templar were not destroyed because they were heretics, rebels, or enemies of the faith. They were destroyed because they carried a revelation capable of shifting the axis of medieval power forever. The ritual they uncovered, the awakening it produced, and the spiritual independence it ignited created a force the Church could neither command nor contain. Rome feared not their swords, but their enlightenment, not their armies, but their conviction, not their influence, but the possibility that humanity could discover a path to the divine that needed no intermediaries. And so, in a desperate attempt to reclaim authority, the Vatican set out to erase the very truth that threatened its dominance. Yet, in trying to silence the Templars, it inadvertently preserved the very legacy it feared most. The immortal legacy of the Templars does not survive in charred manuscripts or broken fortresses. It survives in the echo of their defiance, in the mystery that still surrounds their secrets, and in the timeless allure of men who dared to seek truth beyond the borders of doctrine. Their fall sparked centuries of questions the Church could never answer, and each unanswered question became a torch passed from generation to generation. Today, their story still rises from the ashes, not as a tale of defeat, but as a testament to the unstoppable nature of enlightenment. The Templars proved that knowledge cannot be drowned, suppressed, or buried. It resurfaces like a blade through darkness, cutting through manipulation and reclaiming its place in the world. When you stand at the end of this narrative, you realize that the true power of the Templars lies not in what they guarded, but in what they represented. The courage to question, the discipline to stand alone, and the conviction to pursue truth even at the cost of their lives. Their legacy endures not because of myth, but because of the fear they provoked in those who built their thrones on fragile foundations. The ritual they discovered did more than transform warriors. It exposed the limits of institutional power and ignited the possibility of a spirituality rooted in awakening rather than obedience. And that possibility, once released, could never be imprisoned again. This is the immortal legacy, a force that transcended the flames of execution, the chains of torture, the fabrications of inquisitors, and the centuries of silence imposed by those who tried to rewrite history. The Templars endure in every whisper, every unanswered mystery, and every crack in the official narrative that fails to explain why such a powerful order had to be destroyed. Their story remains a monument to the truth that cannot be buried, a truth that still breathes in the shadows, challenging us to look beyond the version of history we were told, and to seek the one that was hidden. And as long as that truth survives, so do they. If this journey into the forbidden truth of the Knights Templar stirred your curiosity and opened your eyes to the shadows behind medieval power, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps these hidden stories alive and allows us to uncover even deeper revelations that history tried to bury.